Can we all just agree to call this the fourth game in the decade-old Grid series, Grid 4?
Yeah, that's gonna be a solid no.
Fine. It's just a little confusing that Codemasters has hit the reset button on the naming scheme just 11 years into the series. Sure, it's an overt signal that this new game is very much the resurrection of the 2008 original's ideas rather than just another moderate metamorphosis, but let's be reasonable. Anyway, like its namesake, Grid Junior straddles the line between arcade thrills and something slightly more demanding, delivering exciting and dramatic racing action. It just looks and feels like a modern game now. Codemasters has earned a good deal of acclaim in recent years for its aggressively hard-nosed racing sims like the F1 series and Dirt Rally, but you should know that Grid is an altogether different beast. With some tinkering in the options menu, it can certainly be massaged into an intimidating challenge that'll spin around drivers who grab too much throttle while trying to hustle through an apex, and there's always the spectre of dealing with terminal damage without those optional rewinds if you so choose, but iRacing this is not. In its default state, Grid is a grippy, hard-braking and super responsive racer that errs towards the arcade end of the spectrum, and I can't fault it for being faithful to the spirit of its forebear. It's fun to drive. It's not one-size-fits-all handling though. There are noticeable differences between Grid's wide range of vehicle types, from planted high downforce GT beasts to the somewhat soggier, oversteer-happy stock cars and everything in between. The car roster has holes, but it covers a decent spectrum of motor racing metal. It'd be nice to see some fresh faces join the usual retro touring car selection, which is great, but mostly the same as it was in Grid Autosport. Still, it is good to see Ferrari, Porsche, and Holden return after lengthy absences. I think my favourite thing about the cars is that even when they're rolling onto the grid at the start of an event, they're chipped, flecked with bits of rubber, and nursing bruises from previous races. They look like race cars that have been pushed out of a truck, not a museum, and I like that lived-in feeling a lot. Grid features 12 racing locations, a mix of real and fantasy circuits with multiple layouts for each. Some are returning spots that date all the way back to the original Grid, like San Francisco and Okatama, and some are completely fresh. There are gorgeous new street circuits based in Shanghai and Havana, plus China's Zhejiang circuit, which was still a pile of dirt when Grid Autosport was released in 2014. Australia's Sydney Motorsport Park, current home of the World Time Attack Challenge, and a great track that's hugely underrepresented in games, returns to a Codemasters racer for the first time since Trucker Race Driver 3 in 2006. The problem is that it's a very slim track selection compared to its racing peers. In fact, there are a lot fewer tracks here than there were in Grid Autosport. Varied time of day lighting and the incredible wet weather effects mitigate this issue slightly, but stretching just a handful of tracks over so many career events means driving these courses to death. They do look handsome though, especially at night with fireworks displays illuminating the sky. They're bright and bursting with colour, and there's none of that muted look that defines Grid Senior and other Codemasters games of that era. The street tracks in particular have excellent atmosphere too, and are lined with enthusiastic, animated spectators who'll flinch if you go spearing towards them. Grid divides its progression over a bunch of racing categories, each containing a handful of car classes. It's pretty standard. Even the special Fernando Alonso event thread is largely just a series of events similar to ones I'd already run several times already in the other threads, only with Fernando Alonso competing as one of the AI drivers. It's not bad, but it's not that memorable either. It's kind of just there. Grid's AI actually deserves a special mention, however, and not just because it's impressively zippy, authentic, and aggressively racy. In what may turn out to be a terrible decision if NPCs ever achieve sentience, now they can hold grudges. Grid introduces a system that sees opponents who get tired of you roughing them up, marked as nemesis, and they aren't shy about body-checking you back when the time is right. Nemesis also get a temporary boost to their driving skills as the red mist descends, and they become extra motivated to get back on your rear bumper. You can even turn your teammate into a nemesis if you're a bit too eager with a bump draft, which is good for firing them up, but bad for getting them to follow your instructions.
Well, I just asked, but no response.
Teammates can be hired from a growing list of candidates throughout the main career, and returning Grid and Race Driver players should recognise several key names, which is a cute and reverent touch. Grid's returning rewind ability has the potential to take a bit of mojo out of the Nemesis system, if you choose to use it to undo their square-ups that is, but the bigger disappointment is that they're not persistent and only last the length of the current race. You won't have drivers still bent out of shape about your actions popping up for payback at later events in the calendar. It's a bit more streamlined than the original in terms of team management, and it's definitely way too lean on tracks, but Grid packs fun, fast-paced racing into an easy-to-digest format. Sure, it's unrealistic for the final race to be prototypes jumping up and down San Francisco's iconic hills, but Grid isn't trying to be a realistic facsimile of modern racing. Hell, with throngs of spectators dangling over the Armco, if Grid were realistic, the tracks would just be a sea of severed hands and heads. Instead, it's a hyperbolic brand of high-contact, Hollywood-style circuit and street racing delivered with style and confidence. If you think racing rough is rad, get our reviews for Wreckfest and dangerous driving on your radar. For everything else, stick with IGN.